Okay, I think that's everybody admitted, folks. Good afternoon and welcome to this short webinar on making connected things secure. We've arranged this as part of the ongoing Cyber Scotland Week, which is going fantastically well. There's been a whole host of great events already taking place and planned for the rest of the week as well. And hopefully you'll find this webinar hugely interesting as well. So by way of introduction, I'm Graham Bye and I'm currently the Cyber Security Coordinator aligned to the Scottish Business Resilience Centre in Lithgow. And for the last couple of years now, I have been working closely with the Scottish Government, Police Scotland and the National Cyber Security Centre and others, and promoting cyber security and resilience to organisations across all sectors really in Scotland, but with a bit of a focus on the private sector and SMEs, who, as you know, are the bulk of businesses within Scotland. And then signposting them to some of the fabulous resources that are available to them to help them become more secure, to help them develop, and essentially help them to flourish in what is an ever-changing digital world. But as we all know, as our reliance on the internet increases, so does the threat of cyber-related and internet-related crime. And as more and more of our devices are connected to the internet, it's really a time to start thinking about the security of these devices that we're connecting. So the purpose of this webinar this afternoon is to talk about the Internet of Things, talk about the connectivity of devices, and in particular, the recent launch of IASME's Assured scheme, which essentially looks at securing connected devices. So in that regard, I'm delighted that this afternoon we are joined by Jamie Rando from IASME. Jamie is the head of strategy and technical aspects at IASME and has been working on and advising on IoT and the Assured scheme, and also the development of cyber essentials and the IASME governance, amongst a whole host of other things, I'm pretty sure. Also joining us this afternoon is Dr. Cade Wells. Cade is a business development manager at Census. Everybody will know that Census is a not-for-profit innovation centre, and it supports organisations by exploiting technologies and including the Internet of Things. And it really has been a big game changer for many businesses in terms of how they do their work. And we're also joined this afternoon by Conor Mackay. Conor is a member of the Cyber Resilience Unit at Scottish Government and has been heavily involved with a whole host of media and briefing materials around about cyber and also policy and strategy. And moving forward, we've got the new strategic framework, which follows on from the National Cyber Resilience Strategy, which was the first for Scotland a couple of years ago. So we've got a great lineup this afternoon, folks. Really looking forward to this. Feel free to ask any questions to the panel as we go along. If you could just click on the question and answer button on the screen and fire on any questions, we'll do our utmost to answer any questions as quickly as efficiently as we can. We are recording this webinar, so it will be available online afterwards that you can catch up with as well. So really looking forward to this. I'm going to hand you over now to Jamie, who's going to start off the presentations. Jamie.
Thanks, Graham. So yeah, this afternoon, as Graham said, I'd like to talk about some work we've been doing around our IoT Security Assured scheme. I'll tell you a tiny amount about IASME and who we are. I'll also talk about the scheme and sort of where it came from and some of our experience of running our various certifications over recent years and how that led to the development of our scheme. But the real focus for today is some work we've been doing to pilot our Security Assured scheme and the learnings that we found from that of actually applying our information assurance scheme to real life companies and real life products. So hopefully that should be an interesting session. So just a brief introduction to IASME. So we were set up in about 2013, and IASME was originally established in order to provide information assurance to SMEs. So there was at the time, and there still is, lots of information security standards around. So we thought we'd invent another, but this one was focused on SMEs, and the aim was to make it practical, simple, affordable, but still high quality to do information assurance for small organizations. So that's what the IASME governance standard, and that's sort of where we began. We also, at an early stage, became involved in the government Cyber Essentials scheme, originally as part of the 5 separate accreditation bodies. And then in April last year, we took over the running of the scheme so we're now the sole provider of the scheme across the UK. Some of our other schemes are the IoT Security Assured scheme, which obviously we'll talk about a lot today. And we've recently launched our Counter Fraud Fundamentals scheme, which is, again, a simple, practical, inexpensive method for people to use to put fraud controls into their organization. So we have around 250 certification bodies located across the UK and beyond. And the certification bodies are basically companies, lots of small companies, lots of medium and some large, who provide support and guidance to other organizations around cybersecurity. And they're also the companies that certify to our standards. And we now certify around 1,500 companies, kind of over that actually by quite a way, 1,500 companies at least per month to our different standards. And we have a significant CB presence in Scotland, particularly actually around the IoT side. So firstly, I'd like to talk about why IASME is actually interested in internet connected things. Well, with our various standards so far, we've focused on simplifying cybersecurity for the world of IT. So that's your computers, servers, laptops, and so on in companies. And that's where the Cyber Essentials and IASME governance standards are focused. And through doing that, we've learned an awful lot about how we can make that easy for companies and how we can make those sort of make those standards and certifications work effectively. So we thought, well, we've managed to do that pretty well for the IT world. Could we potentially do the same for the world of internet connected devices? So as I put on the screen there, that is definitely a real challenge because as we'll talk about as we go through, and as many of you will know, that the world of IoT is sort of related to IT, to computers, laptops, and servers, and so on. But it has certain unique challenges, particularly around things like the processing power of devices, their network connectivity, just the cost of the device, and the speed in some ways at which the products get to market. So, so there are certainly some challenges in doing that. But we do think, and we did think then that there is great potential to try the same approach with internet connected devices. A simple sort of practical form of assessment without delving too deeply into the technical side, which is where the expense can sometimes come from. So let's look at some of the things that we've learned from our existing certification scheme. So this isn't IoT, this is IT, companies' IT equipment. So I suppose the first thing we learned, and this is not a huge surprise because it's where we're focused, but around 90% of all the companies we've certified to Cyber Essentials and IASME governance are SMEs. Only 10% were large companies. So that sort of tells us that large companies can comply. But certainly the standards we've created so far have been accessible to SMEs. And actually that's really important because something like 99% of all the companies in the whole of the UK are SMEs. So it's very important that we cover those. And if we can help improve the security of those organizations, we can make a massive difference to the security of the country as a whole. We also learned some other things. So it's very hard to get people interested in security. So the people that have joined us today to learn about security, good for you for joining us, but you're definitely a small set of people in terms of all of the people in the country, because security isn't one of those topics that tends to get people excited. As again, you may well know. So the perception is that it's complicated, and it can certainly be complicated, but it certainly doesn't have to be. Again, the perception is that it might be expensive. Again, it can be expensive, but again, there are simple things that can be done. People don't have time to think about security, and that's probably quite reasonable because at the moment, certainly lots of companies are just trying to survive and stay afloat. So you can understand that. And also, lastly, we found that people they don't really understand perhaps why they would be a target of a cyber attack. Why would someone be specifically interested in my organization and what we do? So those are things that we've worked hard to challenge in the work that we've done so far. We've also found from the assessment so far on the IT side that the typical person applying actually isn't technical. So very often with Cyber Essentials in particular, we have an office manager or a legal person or an HR person who's actually completing the assessment and trying to get their company certified. So quite often they're not technical and they just want to get the certification done and get their security improved. And also sometimes the task is delegated to a managed service provider, which actually is in a lot of cases a really good thing. But we have the challenge to make sure that we communicate what needs to be done to that provider via potentially a non-technical person. So those things that we've learned from doing the standards previously, we think have put us in a good position to try the same approach when it comes to IoT security. So I suppose the starting point is, what is IoT? Because it's one of those sort of buzzwords that gets chucked around quite a lot. So Internet of Things is IoT. And what that really means is internet connected devices. So if you look at the diagram on the screen on the right, the graphic, all of those things in the picture are internet connected devices. So in some cases, they're devices which have been specifically manufactured, a new category device which is connected to the internet. So perhaps a smartwatch. I know watches were around before the internet, but a smartwatch is its own category, perhaps. Smartphones and so on. But also a lot of devices which previously weren't connected to the internet and now are. So there's an air conditioner there. There's connected cars, video cameras, temperature sensors, and so on and so forth. And of course the connected fridge, which does actually exist and people do have and has been promised for many years. So it's sort of any of these devices, either at home or in workplaces that have been connected to the internet. Now the reason why they're a separate category is because in some cases they've sort of been added to the device without necessarily a lot of security thought. Not in all cases, but in some. And also they have some things in common. So they have, as I mentioned before, quite often constrained processing capacity, storage, and so on, which means that you can't always supply the same security controls to those that you might do with a computer or a laptop. So yeah, so we found from looking at IoT security that there's actually basic security controls missing, and this is no secret. Lots of surveys and lots of people will tell you this, but default passwords in particular. So a router with admin as the password, or a device with admin as the password, which can be looked up by anyone and therefore makes the device vulnerable when you first turn it on. Missing software updates or no clarity on how long a device will be supported with software updates. How companies manage vulnerabilities sort of varies quite a lot within the world of IoT. Issues around data protection and privacy in particular do come up in IoT. And then the methods used for encryption sometimes have to be a little bit different for the world of IoT because of the constrained processing. So because we've seen sort of a lack of, we and many other people have seen a lack of basic security controls, there is certainly potential to make a big impact to security by doing some of the basic things around IoT. And that's one of the reasons why we were particularly interested in this area. So just a reminder of some of the issues which IoT devices experience around security and privacy. So some good examples. So the first one is a security issue. So there are many children's smartwatches out there. One in particular was very easy to hack, and if it's hacked using some simple techniques, it can track children's location, potentially spoof the child's location, which would mean the parent wouldn't know where the child was, or view personal data within the victim's account. So obviously, that's something of great concern, particularly around privacy and security. A lot of IP security cameras, particularly the inexpensive ones, use a protocol called iLink P2P, and there are other similar protocols. But this particular one it has some issues because it has very limited authentication. It doesn't use encryption. And there's some vulnerabilities which mean that you could potentially, with a little bit of thought, compromise devices very easily. So there's potentially sort of 2 million devices out there that use this protocol, which are essentially very insecure, and they're in sort of people's houses, businesses, and so on. So that's again an issue where there are some basic controls that could be in place on that device, authentication, encryption, and so on, but which just haven't been put on the device for various reasons. So the other 2 examples, and these are to do with privacy. So Ring is obviously perhaps a well-known company. They do the Ring doorbell and other things. They have some good security engineering and good platforms. But there are questions around privacy potentially. So there's been stories about the way in which Ring interacts with law enforcement and shares information with them. There's been questions about hacked devices to do with the revealing of Wi-Fi passwords to passers-by. So you know, Ring have some good products, obviously, but they have also had some issues there on those particular topics. And then also there was a number of privacy questions around smart speakers, where for training purposes, for some of the ones, so Siri and Google Home were mentioned, but perhaps others as well, that they were making recordings of the voice interaction. The idea being that then people behind the scenes can debug and improve the device. But obviously, in a number of cases, people didn't realize that those recordings are being kept. So some of the issues there are actually around how companies articulate to their customers the privacy that the device gives them and their privacy options. So with that landscape in mind, we came to the point where we wanted to develop an IoT certification. Now, the common issue with security is that there's never a standard that fits, so people are always desperate to create a new standard at any opportunity. And you know, we've certainly done that with our previous standards. But with IoT, there are some very good existing standards that we felt that our certification should link to. In particular, our scheme is aligned with the European standards, so ETSI 303645, which is likely to be adopted in European legislation. Is you know, sort of really important mapping point, as well as the proposed UK legislation around IoT devices. So our standard maps closely with those, and we worked very closely with the IoT Security Foundation as well to ensure that our certification mapped very closely to the work that they're doing. So the certification is a set of relatively simple questions. It focuses on the device, the hub, the cloud service, and the app. So it's not so focused on the manufacturer. We're not looking at the organization. We're focused on the device. But there are some questions about how manufacturers do things around, you know, vulnerability management and so on. And the idea is that it's sort of open-ended enough that it can apply to different types of technology. And it operates in a similar way to the Cyber Essentials and the ISME governance scheme. So it's a verified self-assessment. It's marked by a trained assessor who can also give support and guidance to the company it's certifying. So the idea is that as well as doing the self-assessment, you know, you actually get advice on how to improve security. And we found with the other two schemes that gives you a sort of better security outcome overall. So we have 3 levels, basic, silver, and gold. Basic aligns with the proposed UK legislation. Silver is in relation to the mandatory controls of the ETSI standard, and gold includes all the ETSI recommended controls as well. So a manufacturer can certify any of those 3 levels. So let's look at the pilot, because that's the really interesting thing today. So we were lucky to get some funding from government to run a pilot of the certification, which took place sort of from September to sort of wrapped up at the end of January this year. And we brought on board 10 manufacturers of connected consumer devices who sell into the UK market. So we had a spread of manufacturers, some micro businesses, some small, some large, and they had a mix of different products across different sectors. So for instance, we had connected cameras, we had smart sockets, which measured power usage. We had sensors that can be used in buildings, homes, commercial places, office equipment, and so on. So we had a really nice spread of different types of devices and different types of manufacturers. And what we did is we allocated each manufacturer to one of ISME's IoT assessors. And as part of the pilot, we gave the manufacturer a certain amount of support and guidance in order to improve their security and understand what they had to do to become secure. And then they also were assessed to the standard. And then as part of the process, we received feedback from the applicants and also from the assessors about how the process went. This was a really exciting opportunity to see, well, what does actually happen when we try and apply our simple approach to IoT security assessment to real-world devices. So let's see, well, what did we actually learn? So let's talk now about actually the learnings from that pilot. So we've got, you know, the top 10 things that we learned are the things I'd like to share with you today. So the first one, which is a really, really positive, encouraging thing, which is that 2/3 of the manufacturers who took part in the certification process made positive changes to improve the security of their devices. So what that means is, you know, the manufacturers who came to certify Actually, the majority of them had very good security. It was very encouraging, but they needed to, in most cases, do some changes in order to meet the standards. So the most common change they needed was to put in place a vulnerability disclosure policy. So vulnerability disclosure policy sets out what the manufacturer does when a security researcher finds a weakness in their product. It's a really important thing because it means that the relationship between a security researcher and a manufacturer is clear, and it means that you tend to get a really good outcome when it comes to addressing vulnerabilities. So putting that in place was very important and sort of linked processes. We also found that another significant change for many of the manufacturers was around privacy and data protection. So again, it wasn't so much the technology, it was the processes sort of that the manufacturer took to ensure that they were meeting the data protection and privacy requirements. And interestingly, these changes were sort of split between both large and small manufacturers. So both those particular issues were things that large and small manufacturers needed to address. The sort of second of the 10 things was, and we kind of knew this already from the previous schemes, but it was nice to see it in place in this different sort of world of IoT, was that support and guidance from a skilled assessor makes a big impact on device security. So it's a really important point because I think most of the manufacturers, certainly all the manufacturers on our pilot, and I believe many of the manufacturers who will apply going forward, really do want to make things more secure, but it's not always clear what you actually have to do. So it's very helpful to have advice and guidance from someone who can tell you the specific things that you need to do. And again, the vulnerability disclosure policy and data protection were things where lots of advice was given, but also things like referenced security standards. So actually, where does a manufacturer look in order to know what to do in a particular situation? So they were able to point them to things like the IOTSF guidance that's available and various other standards. Also, they gave advice on things like risk assessment. So these were processes within the manufacturer about how they decide risk and how they make decisions. The third thing, and really interesting, was that having a badge on a product is a strong motivating factor to get certified. So I think that's really good actually, because it means that the manufacturers are focusing on their customers and thinking about what their customers want to see. For example, one of the participants said they were really keen to take part because they found that their competitors didn't hold a certification and that they'd be able to apply a badge on their products before their competitors. So that's great. So that means that that's a really strong motivation for manufacturers to comply to the standard and improve their security. So as part of the pilot, we have created a set of badges that can be applied to products, which help make that visible. The fourth one, the question set and online platform was fit for purposes with some minor tweaks. So that was just reassuring for us to know that the question set we'd created seemed to work really well with the sampler manufacturers. And interesting that if you're interested in that question set, visit our website and it's available to download, so you can see the work that we've been doing on it. The fifth one, again, so participants found supporting guidance and templates useful. So we found with our other standards, creating templates is a good way to get people to put things like their security policy and so on in place. And we've done the same for this. So we created a vulnerability disclosure policy template, which many of the companies used, an information asset register templates, and some data protection templates to get people thinking. So these were a really good starting point for the assessors to use with the participants to get them on the way on those topics. The sixth one, defining the scope of the certification can be complex. So this is a really interesting topic. When you think, what are you going to certify? The starting point is obviously the device, but actually in the world of IoT, the intelligence of the device is often sitting perhaps on a hub, which is a box somewhere in the house or building that communicates with the devices. Sometimes it sits in the cloud, and then usually there's an app on a mobile phone or a tablet that's linked into the service. So each of those is potentially a security risk. So what we've done with our assessment is to allow people to choose their own scope. And the aim is to really see what people choose to include. We encourage them to include everything. Certainly they have to include the device, which makes sense, but we'd encourage them to include all the other areas as well. So we need to focus a lot of attention on that topic as we go through the assessments. This was interesting. Completing the assessment needs both technical knowledge and organizational knowledge. So initially, in most cases, it was someone linked to perhaps the product engineering or the security side who who worked with us on the assessment. And then we found actually they needed to bring in other people from the company to do some of the other areas, such as the policies and the company processes around which there are questions. So actually, there would be a better result if those people are brought into the assessment process at the starting point. So sort of operational process people from a company, and also the technical side. So that's something we're going to put into the advice and guidance as people do the assessments. We had a lot of interest from manufacturers who sell to businesses. So the funding for our pilot was based on consumer manufacturers, and we were very focused on that. But we also had a lot of manufacturers who sell perhaps into company supply chains, such as the built environment or so on, who wanted to take part. And we've found that there's a strong desire from those manufacturers actually to get certified, most likely to prove their security within the supply chains that they're applying to. So that's certainly an area that we're going to be focusing the standard on going forward. Second to last, so 50% of participants wanted to certify additional devices. Now, bear in mind, it's obviously a set of only 10 manufacturers there, so we don't want to draw too many conclusions and figures, but it was encouraging to see that those who took part were likely motivated around security and encouraged rather than put off, so that's a good starting point. And they wanted to certify additional devices, so that's a really encouraging thing to see. And lastly, we found, so the existing assessment is a verified self-assessment where the applicant fills in their answers and it's marked by an assessor. There was a desire for a high level of assurance, which we'd sort of anticipated to some extent before this. So we're looking to develop a hands-on version of the standard, which would allow manufacturers to give sort of greater confidence in the security, but whilst also remaining affordable and accessible. So we're looking for sort of a practical compromise that gives a bit more confidence than just a self-assessment, without costing lots and lots of money, which is potentially the case when very technical assessments take place. So that's something that we're looking at going forward, and we're likely to be piloting that again as a sort of second pilot in the coming months. So hopefully those learnings have been interesting to you. In terms of what we're doing next, we launched the scheme at the start of February, and as a result of the pilot, we made lots of improvements to it. And we're offering an initial discount for the first 25 applicants. And then we're looking to target different market sectors in order to grow take-up, probably looking perhaps at all sorts of areas potentially, but certainly things like built environment, buildings and so on, and potentially areas like agri-tech and so on, as well as the consumer marketplace as the legislation sort of comes into force. There's more information on our website there if you're interested, and you can certainly download the question set. There's no charge to that, and just use it as a guide if you find that useful. And as I said, yeah, we're focusing on the audited version going forward, and we'll be doing a pilot with a number of manufacturers of that as the months over the coming months. So hopefully at some point in the future, we'll also be able to share you the learnings of the hands-on pilot as well, perhaps in a similar session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jamie. Do you want to unshare your screen, please?
Of course.
Thank you.
I will just have to remember how to do it. There we go.
Perfect, thank you. So we've had a couple of questions come in there. Jamie, one in particular for yourself. Are the details of the output of this pilot study made publicly available?
They are, yes. So we've got a document which has everything I shared just there with a bit more detail to it. And it's actually ready to be shared. So we'll be sharing that the next week or two. And we'll probably put it on our social media as a starting place, but I'm happy to send it to anyone who's interested if you drop me an email.
Perfect, thanks. And another question came in just before that was, when will we see the lack of security, example, default passwords be a thing of the past? Will the pending regulation legal requirements clean this up quickly, or for already deployed devices, will it take years never to be resolved?
That's a good question. So I think, yeah, I mean, I would say already deployed devices, it depends. I think if it's already deployed device from a well-known manufacturer, there's a good chance that they will continue to get support and tweak, hopefully, and improve security. I would imagine that other types of devices probably won't be ever resolved, because certainly some of the things on the devices are in hardware, some of them are not changeable, and actually some of the manufacturers who are doing a very tight budget may not have the capacity to actually release things to update that. So I think that's the case. I think in terms of lack of security, the default passwords thing, there's already quite a lot of change actually happening, I think, probably on that. For example, things like Apple HomeKit already use a QR code in order to activate their products. I wouldn't rely on a default password. I think the regulation will have a big impact on that, as you'd expect, because it will make it a legal requirement. And obviously, we're waiting to see what the government does in terms of legislation, and we're hoping that will be relatively soon. But as is the nature of government, we don't know when that will be. But it's relatively clear what will be in that legislation, and certainly default passwords would be one, as I'm sure others are aware.
Brilliant, thank you. Cade, I don't know if you had a view on that question as well.
Very much aligns with what Jamie's just said. I think for a lot of the kind of legacy devices, the devices that we already have in our homes from a few years back, unless they're the kind of major brands, it seems unlikely that they would be updated to bring in some of these things. For a lot of the big brand companies, they do include, or I should say, have removed the kind of default passwords and resetting to a default password already. Others still have to do that. So I think we're seeing a lot of change in the new products that are coming to the market. There's definitely a move to looking at ways of allowing consumer IoT to be easy to use and to integrate into the other home systems we have through things like QR codes or NFC, and not be reliant purely on passwords. There's always a risk, obviously, that people, even if it doesn't ship with a default password, could change the password to something that's very easy to guess. So moving away from passwords is actually probably a good thing for all of us within the IoT space where possible.
Perfect, thank you. And a third question then from Howard: are there any sanctions for manufacturers who self-certify fraudulently?
Well, so I think in the proposed legislation, there is an enforcement regime. So that would mean yes. And hopefully that's something which government will follow up on. Certainly from our own, in terms of our certification, the nature of a self-certification or a verified self-assessment is there's a level of trust needed. We have with our certification, you have to have a board member sign off on the answers that are provided, so that gives a certain level of confidence. But that's sometimes why people would look for a sort of a hands-on type of standard, which is why we're looking at that area.
One other thing from me, I just didn't pick up on it, Jamie. Is that UK-wide legislation that's proposed, or is it specific to different countries within the UK?
UK-wide, yeah.
Perfect. Thanks. Okay, that's us covered the questions. Can I hand over to Cade, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. So as Graham introduced me earlier on, I'm Cade Wells. I'm one of the business development managers at Census, and I also lead on IoT cybersecurity for Census. Census, for those that you don't know, is one of the not-for-profit innovation centres in Scotland, focusing on sensing and imaging and IoT. And essentially, we help organisations to overcome challenges, essentially, using these technologies. We work both with companies that are designing and manufacturing devices, developing services, but also increasingly working with organizations that are utilizing these technologies as part of their day-to-day operation. And I think this is where, for me, the whole kind of focus on certification and the importance of certification is I suppose, really kind of come into a lot of the discussions that we see, is that a lot of organizations that come to us who are looking to adopt IoT to get these great benefits, whether it's improvements of productivity, quality of service, or even compliance in other areas, say, well, how do we know how secure an IoT product is? If we walk into our favorite electrical distributor or store, IoT store, or buy online, how can we evaluate the security of one device against another? We certainly can't do it just purely on user reviews and the number of stars against that that product, because quite often that won't cover the security aspects. So how do they do that? And it's not just about the challenge of just initially just looking at that one product, but maybe other products that and services that you're using along with that. So quite often we're asked, well, how can we do that without building or recruiting people to do these assessments in-house? And actually, even if you did recruit to do that, you may not have access to the information that you need to make that assessment, because it might be intellectual property, it might be deeply embedded within a product, so you might not have the information to make that assessment. So that's why there's really that need for certification that allows people to make that decision when they're procuring a device, whether it's for their own home or whether it's for the organizations that they work in, to be able to say, okay, well, we know that it meets this set of criteria, these particular standards, and also looking, when they look at maybe integrating with other things, that the other systems and products that they're buying also have something similar. So it gives you that level of trust that what you use in your home life and also within businesses are secure. So certification is key, and obviously part of doing that. I think as well, the fact that we're kind of openly talking about this is positive. I think the list that IASME has made public is great as well. It's not the case of saying come to us and we'll work with you, but they're actually saying, okay, well, this is what we're going to be talking to you about before you engage. So there's a certain level of work that companies can do and also in some cases some individuals, if they take an interest in this, to actually look through the areas that you should be targeting. And as James already mentioned, there's a lot of information that's available from the IoT Security Foundation. And there's also a lot of information about the new standards that are coming, such as the ETSI, the ETSI standard, the 303.645, which gives details about the more technical elements that maybe you'd want to look at if you're developing a product or service that includes IoT. So I think it's very, very positive outcome that IASME's had with the certification scheme. I think it's great that they provided that support to the companies as they've gone through the scheme, highlighted the areas that can be improved, and that those companies have taken that information and made improvements. And I also have to say, I'm delighted to see a couple of organisations that have gone through this are Scottish IoT products and service providers as well. So that's, I think, Graham, what I'll do is I'll pass over to Connor at this point, just to hear from Connor, and then maybe in the Q&A we can talk a little bit more about the kind of details and areas that people are interested in.
Yep. So it's been an incredibly busy week for the Cyber Resilience Unit in the Scottish Government. We had the Deputy First Minister launch the Strategic Framework for Cyber Resilience Scotland on Monday. And that carries on from our work that we've been doing over the last 6 years with the 2015 Cyber Resilience Strategy for Scotland. And it's aligned with the National Performance Framework and even the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and it's measurable with set strategic indicators. So if you're policy minded, have a read of it. But what might be of interest to manufacturers is looking at the one of the action plans. So the strategic framework involves action plans for the public, private, third sector, and learning skills. And one of the great successes of the last strategy was that it really raised the bar for public sector procurement, embedding cyber resilience practices within that to ask more of the companies that supply the public sector. And in the next in the new strategic framework, we're looking to build upon that and encourage embedding standards within the private sector and also embedding within the governance of organizations. So when it comes to their procurement practices, they'll be increasingly more likely to adopt cyber resilient behaviors, and also go for cyber resilient companies that are certified. So there's an opportunity there. So those who are certified may have an edge over those who aren't certified when it comes to private sector procurement, particularly businesses that supply the public sector. So it's worth having a read into that if you get the chance, and it's on the Scottish Government website. Also, the strategic framework incorporates a whole of government approach. So we're embedding it. It's been embedded into the digital strategy. It's also in the scams prevention strategy, which is due for publication quite soon. So that's something that I've been involved in. It's also embedded into the artificial intelligence strategy, which is going to be published on the 22nd of March 2021. So next month. There's going to be a launch event, and if you go to scotlandaistrategy.com, you can read more about the upcoming AI strategy, how it's been pieced together, the consultation papers, and what's gone into it. So there's a number of working groups, which includes cyber. So it's worth getting signed up to that. There are places at the launch event there. They might sell out soon, so if you're keen on that, sign up for it as well. It's also Cyber Scotland Week this week, as was mentioned by Graham earlier on. So it's now its third year. It's a legacy of hosting Cyber UK in April 2019, and this year we've widened the kind of organisation of it to a partnership approach. So Scotland is the cyber cluster management organisation for Scotland, isn't it? Police Scotland, Young Scot, SBRC, Scottish Enterprise, Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, Education Scotland, Highlands and Islands Enterprise, and Skills Development Scotland are involved in that. And those partners have also formed the Cyber Scotland Partnership. So if you go to cyberscotland.com, you can read more about that. And that was launched yesterday by Ivan McKee, Minister for Trade, Innovation and Public Finance. So it's definitely worth having a look at that. Let's make sure I've covered everything. The new strategic framework also incorporates IoT and mentions the kind of need that we need to be able to be more agile and respond quickly to the challenges that are emerging. And this standard is part of that. I'll hand back to Graham.
Perfect. Thanks, Connor. I suppose there's a couple of observations from me is that, there's so much happening in this world that it's moving at a pace. And I suppose for me, you can't do everything at once, and I think you've got to focus on what we really need to do. So scoping it all out is really important. But I think it's good news. Yeah. I think it's good that we're trying to be on the front foot, looking ahead, because things are just moving at a massive pace, particularly over the last year where digital technology has just accelerated so fast, and people are now adopting different working practices. So really good news, really exciting news for me. I'm just looking at the question answers. I don't see any more questions coming in. So let's double check unless anybody's got any other questions. Nope. Nope, that's it. So, folks, has anybody else got anything they want to add?
I did actually just want to add that the two Scottish companies that Cade referred to were both working, I think, are they part of Census or working very closely with Census, aren't they, Cade?
One of the companies was has worked closely with Census through our IoT Cyber Challenge Programme Accelerator. And the other company we're aware of through our wider activities within Census.
Yeah, and they both got the gold standard as well. So I think that's a nice
go for
positive
gold
thing to see. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely, very positive. One thing I think I kind of follow up on from what Jamie said is the importance of cybersecurity in an organisation and for the organisation as a whole, really to look at this. And it's not the preserve of the engineers and the product developers. And the reason that I suppose I'm reiterating the point that Jamie had made earlier is the importance around the kind of top three things that people are talking about around legislation, about no default passwords, developing a vulnerability disclosure program, and around how long your company will provide updates for. These are questions that aren't solely technical, but actually at the core of the business. and actually the business model that you have. So, for example, providing updates to a product or a service that you're offering, there's important calculations that needs to be made there in terms of the cost of the support, the cost of it on a yearly basis, and how long you plan to provide that support for in designing a service or a product. So I think that just in itself is an example of why this is something that really a whole organization should look at, and why, again, I think the outcome from the pilot has demonstrated that that's where there has been a need for people to come together in order to actually address the questions of various criteria to get the certification. So I just wanted to kind of reiterate at that point. The other thing, while I'm here, it's also worth mentioning that Census, as part of our IoT Cyber Challenge programme, which we're delivering with support from Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Government, have launched this month the IoT Secure service, which actually provides hands-on one-to-one assistance with organisations developing, manufacturing IoT products and services, but also to companies that are using IoT as part of their day-to-day operations. So it's a service that, as I said, that's open to Scottish organisations. The first part of the service is available to organisations of any size. But for those organisations that maybe need hands-on assistance on the software, hardware, and the telecommunications, if they're an SME, they may also be eligible to receive support from our engineering team. So again, this is helping to complement the activities of other organisations, and also possibly something very useful for those that are looking to go for certification, but think that there may be something that they're keen to address. So very happy to share my email address and for people to approach me if they're interested on behalf of their organisation to have a discussion.
Excellent, thank you, Kate. And there's just one other question came into the group. Can you please share your opinion about the trend of IoT? Will it be more distributed or centralised, and what will be the challenges to the security?
I can share a thought on that one, only because something I read recently, actually, which is, and I think this is probably an interesting thing that might be happening, is obviously with perhaps the current world of IoT, a lot of the intelligence is based in the center in the cloud. But of course, that creates a big problem, because as soon as you remove the internet connection, there's no intelligence on the device. So, and I know there are people who will know more about this on the call perhaps than I. There is a move to move some of that intelligence back out onto devices using things like tiny ML, machine learning, and there's a lot of there is some new chips being developed and new structures which allow that sort of on-machine decision-making, on-device decision-making to take place and still do a lot of the sort of basic AI, but at quite a low power. So my understanding is that there's a trend to move actually from the center back out to the device for all sorts of reasons. But the main one being, as soon as you pull the internet connection, then the thing stops working, which is actually one of the things which the ETSI standard is trying to change. So.
Thanks, Jamie. And there's quite a lengthy question here. It seems a bit technical for me, but I'll go through it. An important aspect for the IoT that involves actuation too is dynamic cybersecurity and resilience, i.e. how systems detect and react to the onset of potential unknown incidents and attacks. This goes beyond static security verification or certification, and some standardization certification in this space should also be considered. This is something the relevant research community is looking at, and any comments on the update from industry would be welcome.
Happy to dive in here. So this is definitely an area of research, both academically and industry, at how we can do this effectively, and in fact also ties back into the last question about centralized and decentralization of elements of IoT. There's a lot of discussion about how you can detect threats that may be unknown, that may be new, where you may find that where somebody is initially attacking is a certain point within the IoT. So for example, it might be the cloud system, or it might actually be the hardware, maybe a sensor. How can you detect that? How can you mitigate against these unknowns? And also, how can you actually recover from this? And obviously a lot of discussion as well around, well, if you've got somebody attacking an IoT system or a part of an IoT system in one geographic area, it's possible that it might happen in another geographic area at another point. Are there learnings that you can take? How do you share those learnings from this part of an IoT system or this one complete IoT system and with others? How can you kind of propagate that information through and use that either to prevent additional attacks actually happening, or at least to reduce the potential damage or improve the ability to actually recover from those? So it's definitely something which there's lots of interest in, and there are lots of people working on this. There also are companies that are looking at ways of not necessarily assessing immediately what the attack is, but just trying to distract an attacker, whether it's a manual attack or a scripted attack, where you may deceive the attacker into another system, which in fact isn't a critical system. It's essentially maybe a simulation of an IoT system, in order to keep them busy, to keep them distracted from actually the rest of the infrastructure that's of more value. And it also gives you that time to understand maybe where the attack's coming from, but also learn about that attack if it's something that's new. So gather that intelligence, which you then may analyze, and then maybe do a software update in the future to prevent that initial attack coming in from occurring.
Thanks, Kate. I had one other question from someone who wanted to verbally ask the question, so I don't know if Mike is there. Mike, you have got a question for the panel? You're on mute. No. No, disappeared. Okay, Mike, if you want to submit a question, that's fine. We can pick it up. But thanks very much. So let's see. Nope, that's the end of the questions. So, folks, I think on that basis, it's been a really good webinar. I think there's been a lot of really interesting things discussed there. Can I first of all thank the panelists for your time, for coming along and sharing your views and your expertise with us. It's been really worthwhile. And thanks to everyone who's joined this webinar. I hope you took a lot away from it. You've got some links that you will follow up on, that you can get access to the websites and more information. So this remains for me just to close the webinar and thank everybody for their attendance, and have a great Cyber Scotland week. Thanks very much. Bye.